Welcome back to our next video. By now you have learned a bit about us, our journey, how to build your medical team, the science behind bee venom, learned about histamines. So really, chugging along here, but this video is focusing all about mold. And really we want to chat about why it's just really not great to be in mold when you have Lyme disease. It's just not a recipe for success. I mean, for anybody, but especially with Lyme. Yeah, so we'll chat about that, and we also want to share resources that we have found that can be really helpful in figuring out what the mold levels are with you, and then also talking about, what to do if you are in mold. Mm-hmm. So do you want to chat a bit about why Lyme and mold are not friends?
Yeah, first of all, there's no just one mold. There are a bunch of different molds. For me, I know one of the biggest ones I was affected by was ochratoxin and aflatoxin, and molds can all be cancerous. They can give people horrible deformities, disabilities, diseases, can cause cancer, predispose folks to death via these horrible diseases. But again, the reason why mold is problematic with Lyme is because it not only mimics a lot of Lyme symptoms, but it all goes back to that mast cell degranulation. And so what we talked about was that mast cells respond to stimulants in your environment that could be potentially allergenic.
Yes.
Right? And when you have mast cell activation syndrome or some other mast cell activation disease, your mast cells are inappropriately responding to stimuli. So mold, which is a known allergen, will only trigger that activation further. And because that activation releases histamine, can actually be very toxic when it comes to bee venom because of the whole mast cell relation. And so stinging when you're in a moldy environment and stinging without having gotten out or having treated that mold in your body can actually predispose you to some really scary things involving and including anaphylaxis.
Yeah, and a big thing to talk about with mold is, it's one thing to identify. So I just moved, right? And I didn't even realize how bad the mold was in my previous place because I got the ERMI test, which we'll talk about, and I was, the number wasn't terrible, and I felt like I still had enough functionality. And then once I moved and got here and had to go back to finish up stuff and everything, I felt horrible. Immediately within 20 minutes or so, my stings were itching, my skin was itchy, I was struggling to breathe, and it just goes to show, right? It might not feel like it's that serious. And it might not feel, it's more of an inconvenience than you want to deal with. But it's so, so important. And when you do, figure out these tests and see what the mold levels are, it's really hard. And Siri can talk about this even more than I can, that when you move and you realize this is just not a place that's conducive to my healing, you will have to get rid of a lot of your stuff because it isn't just the physical building that will have those mold spores, but they get into your clothing, into your mattress.
Just for some background, because I feel like I have a really dire story, but I was living in a house that was even way beyond the upper limit for what's considered healthy, in my house where I grew up in Connecticut. If you know what the ERMI test is, and we'll kind of go into what that is in a little while, but I was a 34 there, and some parts of my house we tested we have 3 floors, and one floor was a 36. And so it was mind. That is actually cancerous and can actually be really toxic to even healthy people. It's something that you want to get out of, and thankfully my folks don't live there anymore. But when I was there, I was not improving at all. I was actually rapidly degrading. I spent most of my time in bed. I was constantly in a fog. I couldn't walk. I couldn't eat. Everything upset my gut. I was constantly tired. Just a lot of the Lyme symptoms and Bartonella symptoms were just overlapping with mold. I didn't even know where I was, and my car was moldy, which is another problem. Your cars can be moldy with moisture, and so it was in my clothes, it was in my things, it was in my makeup, it was in everything, and so I just couldn't get out of it. And then from Connecticut, I moved to San Francisco, and there I was able to find an apartment that had an ERMI 4. But before I moved there, I basically put away most of my clothes, ones that I really wanted, and threw out everything else. Take anything with me. To this day, I only have maybe 2 pairs of jeans and just a few pairs of joggers, like comfy clothes. And I moved to San Francisco with 3 shirts, and after that, like, I only have about 10 shirts.
Yeah, now it's been some time.
It's almost been a year. From San Francisco, I moved to Utah temporarily and live in an ERMI 1.9, and I've expanded a little bit, but me and my partner needed to buy everything new, like new couches. Like, he had to get rid of a lot of his things as well. Shoes, like mattress, shoes we had to clean off really well. Things that we want to keep, like we still continue to use like a borax clothing detergent, because borax can be really good for killing mold. But even those clothes, we had to go to a different laundromat to wash a few times and dry completely, because it's that moisture with mold that allows it to grow. And so there's a really big process of really how to do that, and maybe we'll go into that in deeper detail
a resource
on our podcast, which is maybe soon to come, and might be more interesting for you all to hear about these particularities then. But just to kind of go into how intense of a process it is to really get rid of your mold is very taxing, and maybe one of the biggest precursors to getting started with BVENOM.
And as taxing as it is, like, clearly you can see how worth it, right? Like, do not put this off. Like, it's hard, it can be expensive, there's so many things, but at the end of the day, you are on this journey to heal. And if you do not take that first step, you're just wasting the money and the time down the road. And
a lot of heartbreak, honestly.
It's just so hard. Just wanted to kind of give you guys an idea of what that looks like in real life, but
and then kind of like to transition into like some resources for how you kind of get into this. Like, for me, and I'm not sure about like kind of how your doctor approaches with you, Marissa, but for me, when I wasn't improving from herbals or medications, like Western medications, last January, my physician ordered a urine test for mold. And just to, as like a little disclaimer, that many folks will say that blood tests are a really good way to detect mold, but they're really not, because where mold is excreted is through your kidneys, and so your urine. And so the best way to really tell is through your urine, and is becoming an increasingly validated way of looking at that amount.
And like she was even saying that, if stuff wasn't coming to the surface, to like go do a sauna session and
or glutathione.
Like do these things so that you really get a solid understanding of how much is in your system. But because
you're mobilizing it at that point, and so when you're mobilizing it, then it's easier for urine to be tested for it.
Exactly. So the test that I think we both did, so there are like 2, there's like the Great Plains and the real-time one, and I know that the real-time one is better for testing black mold. And you did the real-time one.
I did real-time, and I really liked it because it was like,
right?
In a way, because it gave you like your categories for like the higher up levels of mold, where I believe Great Plain is like super specific sometimes, which may or may not always be helpful. But again, it's up to your doctor and what your doctor thinks as well, because they're going to be the ones interpreting it as much as like we have a preference. They really are the experts. But one really great resource that my physician gave me was a book called Toxic by Dr. Neil Nathan, who has extensively worked with Dr. Shoemaker, who has like kind of founded this field. Dr. Nathan really talks about different blood tests that can be ordered, which again, my doctor ordered for me, including things like MMP, TGF-beta1, like C4A, those sorts of tests. Again, come from these books, and not anyone in particular. Like, they really do come from these physicians who've researched this. Shoemaker, Neil Nathan, they're really great resources, and sometimes on their sites, you are able to actually find doctors who have worked with them. So that can be really great if you especially struggle with mold and really need to like find an expert. And so, like our doctors kind of walked us through these existing protocols for mold and told us about different options for medications. And just as, again, a little disclaimer, like there might be different medications that people tell you to take or recommend for you, but just keep in mind, again, that's a conversation you really need to have for your physician.
Yeah, and whatever types, you don't know what types of mold you were in, you don't know how long you've been. I mean, it's just so different. It's so different.
Yeah, and there are certain types of medications that Dr. Nathan talks about that are better for certain types of molds. And again, like this was a situation where my doctor was like, I think you should read this and then let's talk about like what you find. And that's kind of the process that we went through. And she was like, okay, like this is what would maybe be best for you. And then we did that. But keep in mind that if you don't have the right setup, like body wise and stability wise with like supplements, like some of these medications can actually be really damaging and destructive for your body. So you really need to work with a physician to find the right dosage and what's actually going to be best for you.
Yeah. And to talk about, how we knew what types of mold, as Siri was mentioning, like the main types that she was really affected by. We both did an ERMI test, ERMI, and we did the one by Envirobiomics. And did you order the Swiffer one as well?
Yeah, so I did both the Swiffer and vacuum, and then there's another company called Mycometrics that does mold tests as well. But to be honest, like, and again, this is my experience and like not related to anybody else's potential experience, but I just found that website a little bit hard to navigate. Yeah. But again, only my experience, and I found Envirobiomics to have a really easy to navigate website and a really helpful customer service. Like if Mike is watching this, like Mike is a great guy.
Your homie Mike. And that basically, I mean, you can go on their site, we'll link it below, but basically just like wipe different parts of your house to kind of get a sense at all the different points of what the mold's like. And this is a new build, but I think it's important to mention that not all new houses are clean. Like just because you're moving into a new house, if you are, if you have recently, do not skimp on doing this test. Like, this was a new build, but I just didn't know, right? It's Colorado, we get thunderstorms all the time. I don't know how long these structures have been up. I don't know what the insulation's like you just don't know. And even though I can say like this is a high quality place, it's worth it, it is
and
needed.
Again, based on just different markers in your blood or like another urine test like 6 months down the line can kind of tell you like whether you need to retest again in case something has changed or in case like you're done with your medication protocol.
Or if you had to eradicate mold in your house, like if you like this place was a negative 4.8, which is insane because I like didn't even know that it was like that good. So feeling very grateful, but again, like everybody is so different. So
and they give you a range of what's good and what's bad. So like don't feel like you're like, oh, like what's the number low. And sometimes people ask us like, what's the difference between an air test and a mold test, like an ERMI test. And just to give you a little bit of the science, like the technology behind ERMI is called like a mold specific polymerase chain reaction. And what that basically means is that you are collecting a historical representation of mold in your house and you're sending it to a lab where they then take that mold DNA and amplify it under laboratory conditions to then detect the mold in your home. Whereas an air sample is what an air sample is and is often just not an accurate representation of the mold in your home. Oftentimes air samples also rely on just like visual cues to like visual mold to like be like, oh, like obviously we see mold, so like we see it. And, like the ERMI is super, super sensitive, which is really positive, but can also just be like a little irritating too, because like sometimes just bringing shoes into the home from like a moldy environment can just a little bit increase that score. So you want to take it very seriously, but just keep in mind it could just shift around based on like different things, but it doesn't mean that your house is moldy or you have to move out. It's just you got to just monitor it and like keep it in the back of your mind.
Yeah. So that is everything that we have to share on mold. So we will link all the books that Siri talked about, all of the tests that we've done. But yeah, that's really, we really wanted to make mold its own video because of how important it is in your healing journey. So hopefully this helped you, and we will see you in our next video.
See ya. Thank you.